Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. Welcome to the March meeting of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our last two meetings, remember we did not approve the December 2007 minutes, so we will do that tonight, in addition to the minutes of our January 14, 2008 meeting. And since all members have received a copy of those minutes, the reading of the minutes will be omitted. Let's first take up the December 10, 2007 minutes. Are there any suggested changes to those minutes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes of our December 10, 2007 meeting are hereby adopted upon unanimous consent. With respect to the minutes of our January 14, 2008 meeting, are there any suggested changes or corrections to those minutes? You'll be happy to hear that although Bill Clark is not with us this term, I did email him a copy of these minutes, and he has given us his corrections to those minutes. And they have been incorporated already. So thank you, Bill, for that. Any other suggested changes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes of our January 14 meeting are adopted upon unanimous consent. Joan Caldwell, our moderator pro tem.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting, as most of you, hopefully all of you, may already know, the Greenwich Arts Council, which has enjoyed a wonderful relationship with the town for, I guess it's 20 years, has taken a leaf from the book of the Bruce Museum and has invited all of the members of the town meeting to come and visit them on the evening of Wednesday, March 26th, between 6 and 8 p.m. They're located on the second and third floors of what we know as the Senior Center. They're inviting us to come and see their exhibit, to learn something about what they do, to meet with some of their board members and talk about the future of the Arts Center. In general, it's a meet and greet, and that is Mr. Burns and I had accepted that invitation on your behalf. What I am asking that each of the district leaders do tonight is poll your districts and see how many of you will be able to attend. By all means, bring your spouse and let us know, either Mr. Byrne, myself, or Carm Butkins, so that we can call the Arts Center and let them know how many people to meet on the 26th. We enjoy going to the Bruce Museum so much. This is another great opportunity to see what goes on here in Greenwich. Thanks.
Thank you. The time is 6 to 8 p.m. It is my pleasure to welcome and thank on behalf of the RTM the president of the Greenwich League of Women Voters, Donna Nikitas.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Greenwich, I am pleased to present to the RTM this evening a new copy of the 2008-2009 RTM directory. I would also like to thank Beacon Point Marina and the Greenwich Water Club for once again underwriting the printing cost. Thank you and enjoy them.
Thank you so much. Bob Brady, District 5.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, guests. At its January meeting, the First Selectman invited the RTM to appoint a member to participate as a non-voting member in the remaining CIP committee meetings. The moderator appointed Josh Brown of District 8 and me as an alternate. As Josh was unable to attend the 2 remaining CIP committee meetings, he asked me to do so and to make this report. This report is on the process, not on the substance, of the recommended capital budget, as that budget is not yet before us. By January, most of the CIP work and decision-making was complete. The CIP committee met twice, subsequent to Josh's and my appointment on January 16th and 23rd. The First Selectman presented the CIP to the BET Budget Committee on February 4th. Mr. Tessie conducted the meetings in an open and transparent fashion, seeking comments and recommendations from non-voting members. He included some of these in the BET presentation. Projects are proposed by the departments with supporting documentation explaining the projects, why they're needed, their costs, the years expended, and the effects on operating revenues and expenses. Each project is scored 0 to 5 points on each of 13 categories by committee members, and the projects which exceed the threshold score are included in the proposed budgets. There is a process problem, which was presented at the January 16th meeting. Currently, the score sheets are not available for review, and they are manually tabulated. The result is that the tabulation results are not easily audited nor transparent. Clerical errors are difficult to find and to correct. The most important thing to come out of attending the meetings was a better understanding of the statutory constraints on the town's borrowing capability. Unlike a private entity, the town is prohibited from borrowing to effectively extend the term of a loan on a project. Consequently, the January 16th meeting was substantially devoted to discussion of the 2011 to 2015 problem presented by loans maturing and insufficient money being available to pay them off. The discussion included the alternatives available, defer projects, increase the tax levy contribution to capital by increasing taxes and or reducing operating expenditures, and extending borrowing terms from 5 to a longer period to flatten a debt service curve. The First Selectman ultimately recommended deferring projects, pushing about $50 million out from the next 5 years or so into later periods. There was no quantification of the effect of this on operating costs due to the deferral, but some of the projects being deferred are in effect maintenance projects, and it will result in higher operating and maintenance costs for not doing the work. The First Selectman indicated his intention to include the non-voting representatives from other town bodies in the CIP process for the next fiscal year. We commend him for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for agreeing to represent the RTM in that process. Jerry Isaacson, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At our Health and Human Services Committee meeting on Tuesday night, I had invited Sam Deibler and Lori Jackson, the Director and Chair of the Commission on Aging, to give us a brief excuse me, preliminary report on the survey that was recently sent out. I won't go through the whole thing, but just a couple of highlights. There were 4,000 surveys sent out. As of that night, there were 1,057 returned, which is pretty extraordinary. The 65 to 69 age group were more likely than other ages to say the concept appeals a great deal, and make of this what you will, but the 70 plus are less sure of the program elements that interest them, but are the most frequent users of the center. I don't know. But 90% of the respondents so far had a great deal or somewhat of an interest in a senior center. Another thing that came out was that one facility need not encompass all of the activities of the senior center. For instance, swimming could be done at Boys and Girls Club or some other place. There are plays, there are other outside activities, educational activities, and so on. They have submitted a very long list of activities to a design consultant, and I know you can't see it from here, but you can see the length of the list. There are 49 such activities here. One of the things they've discovered is that they visited the Westport facility and found that it is a beautiful building. It has lots of things going on in it, but it's too small. And what they discovered was that after they built it, they attracted more people, apparently. And so it's already, they've outsized the building. They expect not to have that problem here, mainly because of this survey. They have a pretty good handle now on numbers of people who might want to persist. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacson. One reminder before we take any votes this evening: any member who was not present at the January meeting and who has not already made arrangements to be sworn in will have to do that before participating in any votes tonight. That now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. Pursuant to the reports I received regarding the organization. I'm sorry. Nancy Weisler, Chairman of the Board of Education.
Good evening, Mr. Byrne, Moderator Byrne, members of the RTM, and guests. Thought it would be important to provide a brief report on the mold problems at Hamilton Avenue School. Events began a week ago Wednesday. To me, it seems much longer, with a report of a ceiling leak in a small spot of discoloration above the ceiling tile near the wall in one of the modular classrooms. The facilities staff reviewed the situation that Wednesday and contacted the district's environmental specialist to visit and assess the situation, including taking air quality measurements. The specialist returned late Friday to further investigate the situation in the room under question and in 2 additional rooms. In so doing, the environmental specialist found mold in the soffits and exterior walls of those rooms. Dr. Sternberg was informed of the situation on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and called me to apprise me of the situation. Thus began a marathon weekend of meetings involving district staff, the Board of Education members, town officials, environmental and public health experts. I won't soon forget the sight of Peter Tessie and Steve Walker, Dr. Sternberg, several board members on ladders with their heads stuck into the soffit at Hamilton Avenue School. Wasn't a great sight. The first concern was the health and safety of our kids and staff. Under state law, the superintendent has the power to close a school in an emergency situation and implement a relocation plan. Dr. Sternberg, in consultation with me, the 2 other board members who were at the site, town officials, and outside experts, chose to exercise that power. That will come to a board vote this Thursday night. The immediate task then became to put together a plan to house Hamilton Avenue students and staff. As I'm sure you're aware, the best option was to relocate each class with its teacher to 6 other town schools, keeping grades together. This was a very complex puzzle that had to be solved in a very short period of time. The work involved was enormous. Space had to be found for 370 students, a lot of staff, interim child care provided last week, furniture moved, bus routes put together. Today was the first day that Hamilton Avenue students spent the day at their host schools, and we understand that things went very smoothly. I know that some have wondered whether we acted precipitously in closing the school. The initial testing did not indicate any problems with the ambient air. However, we received the culture test for mold today that did indicate a higher level of non-toxic mold. While these results are not at the level considered to be hazardous to one's health, we are doing additional testing. Moreover, significant mold is pervasive in approximately 90% of the soffits, and minor mold isn't evident in the 7 walls that we've looked at so far. Knowing what we know now, it would not be prudent from a health and safety or a town liability standpoint to continue to send 400 people, mostly kids, into a building who study and work on a daily basis without remediation of that facility. Many Hamilton Avenue parents have told us that in very pointed terms. Experts have told us that further testing of the building would have the risk of releasing mold into the air, and experts further advised us that remediation would be likely to take several months, if possible, and couldn't be done with people in the building. This brings up the question of Glenville School. Where will it be housed during its planned rebuilding? The options include remediating the modulars so they can be safely used for this purpose as originally planned, buying or leasing new modulars, and/or finding space for Glenville students and staff at other locations. Each of these options has its pros and cons. This is the board's next priority, and we are forming a special committee to address it intensively over the next few weeks, with the goal of the full board making a decision by the end of the month. There's been a lot of speculation about the causes of the mold at the modulars. The board's initial focus has been on the issues of health and education of our students, rather than assessing accountability. However, initial evaluations by independent engineers suggest that the problem relates to design and construction flaws, not maintenance problems. The special board committee will be looking into this issue of the cause with the help of outside experts. A final, very important question is the financial implications for the town. As far as the costs of the relocation and the environmental testing, the Board of Ed will have a preliminary estimate at its meeting this Thursday. We expect to have an estimate of the incremental cost for relocation of Glenville by the end of the month. We plan to request RTM approval for an interim appropriation at your April meeting. And just one last note, if you bear with me. I don't think I've ever been so proud to live in this town as I have over the past 10 days. I mean, it's been stressful for all of us, but every single group has pulled together and basically has gone above and beyond to get us through this difficult situation. The school administration has spent hundreds of hours under great pressure to form a plan. Damaris Rao, the principal of Ham Ave, and her staff, and the staff at the host schools have shown leadership like the true professionals they are. Peter Tessie, Steve Walko, other town departments have answered our call with tremendous understanding and respect and support. Community organizations, including the United Way, Family Centers, the Children's Day Center, the Boys and Girls Club, and the Greenwich Alliance for Education, among many others, have stepped up to assist us without a moment's hesitation. And perhaps the most remarkable thing of all has been the parents. The Hamilton Avenue parents have had more than their fair share of troubles over the past few years. Yet generally they have reacted to this latest setback with grace and dignity. In response, the parents at the host schools have been tremendously warm, welcoming, and generous. The Greenwich community has once again demonstrated its resolve to help those in need with a generosity of spirit and effort. So I appreciate your support, and we will keep you informed.
Thank you. And we wish you success as you move forward with that. All right, back to our call. I notified our committee and district leaders that based on the reports that we received, I would suggest the following organization of the items before us tonight. I will designate for placement on our consent calendar items 2 through 9, 13, 14, 24, and 32. I will also recommend that we suspend the rules and combine the following items for voting purposes. Items 10, 12, 16 through 22, and 26 through 31. Now, if those remain as suggested, that would leave us to consider separately items 1, 11, 15, 16, 23, 25, and 33. So the first order of business, Mary Ferry? Oh, you know what? Yeah, I apologize for that. Right, in the email, I picked that up. 16 is a separate item, so 16 is not among the combined items. That would be, the combined items would be 10, 12, 17 to 22, and 26 to 31. Okay, 16 would be a separate item. All right, at this point, I will now designate the following items. Once again, I'll read the numbers and then I will go through them. If there is no objection that is upheld, we will not receive committee reports, nor will there be any discussion on items that remain on our consent calendar. So the following are going to be placed on our consent calendar. Items 2 through 9, 13, 14, 24, and 32. The first item, item 2, is the appointment of Ellen Avellino as an alternate member of the Planning and Zoning Commission for a term expiring March 31, 2011. Item 3 is the appointment of Margarita Albin as an alternate member of the Planning and Zoning Commission with a term expiring March 31, 2011. Item 4, the appointment of Frederick Brooks to be an alternate member of the Planning and Zoning Commission with a term expiring March 31, 2011. Item 5, the appointment of Garrett Dietz to be a member of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses One-Word Agency for a term expiring March 31, 2012. Item 6, the appointment of Robert Alio to be a member of the Board of Health with a term expiring March 31, 2012. Item 7, the appointment of Peter Arturi to be a member of the Board of Health with a term expiring March 31, 2012. Item 8, the appointment of Thomas Zack to be a member of the Alarm Appeals Board with a term expiring March 31, 2012. Number 9, the appointment of Robert Burns to be a member of the Southwestern Regional Planning Agency, SWRPA, with a term expiring March 31, 2010. Item 13 is the appointment of Aris Christ to be a member of the Historic District Commission with a term expiring March 31, 2013. Item 14, the appointment of Jane Finn to be a member of the Board of Ethics with a term expiring March 31, 2010. Item 24 is the acceptance of a gift of 3 solar trash containers valued at $13,500 to be installed at Greenwich Point. The gift is from the Friends of Greenwich Point. And the last item that I will place on our consent calendar is item 32. And that is the appointment of the following 5 RTM members to be regular members of the RTM Labor Contracts Committee. And those members are James Boutelle, Joshua Brown, Robert Burns, Joan Caldwell, and David Detchen. Their term expires at the end of the RTM term, although our rules do provide members continue to serve until replaced if they continue to be RTM members. So those are the items that I have now placed on our consent calendar. Are there any objections to any of those items remaining on our consent calendar? Hearing none, will our district chairs please mark your voting cards, consent calendar items 2 through 9, 13, 14, 24, and 32, and please proceed to poll your delegation. I will now suggest a motion to suspend the rules to combine the following items for voting purposes. Items 10, 12, 17 through 22, 26 through 31. Is there such a motion to suspend the rules? It has been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to combine items 10, 12, 17 through 22, and 26 through 31 for voting purposes. The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of the motion to suspend the rules to combine items 10, 12, 17 through 22, and 26 through 31, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. We will take care of the combined items first, and to repeat, that would leave us items 1, 11, 15, 16, 23, 25, and 33 to take up separately. So the first of our combined items is item number 10, which is an appointment of William Galvin Lynn Lavery, our selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and members of the RTM. We have a small typographical error. William Galvin should say 3/31/12. Item number 10, it is a substitute resolution. Be it resolved that the following named persons nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a regular member of the Inland Wetlands Watercourses Agency for a term expiring 3/31/12. William Galvin.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 10 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports of our committees that consider this? Beginning with Mr. Von Kaiserling, Chair of our Appointments Committee.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Galvin did come before us. He is being moved, as you understand, up to a regular on inland wetlands. He has served a certain amount of time as an alternate, during which she's the pun, got his feet wet. He is a very hard-nosed analyst and has a strong residential basis to his philosophy. We felt that he would be an excellent nominee and appointment. We voted for him 12-0-0 on January the 29th.
Peter Berg, giving the report for the Land Use Committee.
Good evening, everybody. The Land Use Committee met last Monday evening, and we interviewed Mr. Galvin for the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency for a term expiring 3/31/12. Mr. Galvin, we interviewed Mr. Galvin and Mr. Dietz together. Mr. Galvin said that flooding is getting worse in town. He said it's due to building size and complexity and to weather. That educating the public is part of the solution. He mentioned that deer often ravage the mitigation plans that are implemented to deal with flooding. And he discussed the fact that people frequently do not reclaim their bonds. The vote on Mr. Galvin was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 10. Item 12 now comes before us. Ms. Lavery.
Item 12, resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Board of Health for a term expiring 3/31/12. Marilyn Ross Kahn, MD.
Yes, Jerry Isaacson with the report of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. We interviewed Dr. Kahn. This would be for another term on the Board of Health, ending March 31st, 2012. Dr. Kahn is a retired pediatrician. She belongs to a wide range of organizations in the healthcare field and therefore has access to a range of publications pertinent to the Board of Health's concerns. I've attended many of their board meetings, and she often brings newsletters, articles, emails, what have you, that are concern of the Board of Health. Her particular interest is in anti-smoking activities and adolescent obesity issues. Our vote was 11-0-1. District 1 was the abstention because he arrived late.
Thank you. Mr. Von Kaiserling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
We interviewed Dr. Kahn as a renomination on February the 14th, Valentine's Day. We voted for her 11-0-0 with District 3 absent. One particular thing that was of critical importance was Dr. Kahn's training in infectious diseases, and as you know, as part of our catastrophe planning in the town, infectious diseases are one of the major, most likely component.
Thank you. Discussion on item 12. Item 17 now comes before us. Peter Crumbine, our selectman.
Good evening. We have another substitute resolution here, a typo on the date. Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Nathaniel Witherell Board for a term expiring 3/31/11, not 3/31/08. Christopher Ann Thurlow.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 17 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Isaacson, with the report on this item.
Thank you. Health and Human Services interviewed Chris Thurlow tonight, just before our meeting here. She is a very, very active member of the board now of Nathaniel Witherell, and in fact is the vice chair of that board. She's also on the board of the Patients Trust Fund and on the board of the Friends of Nathaniel Witherell. So she's very active in this Witherell community. She is particularly eager to continue as on that board. Her primary interests are in team building and bringing disparate groups together for the good of the patients there. I might add that she came up with one interesting number tonight, that the Friends of Witherell, which is a 501c organization now, has already raised $100,000. That's up from $50,000, which I had heard just a couple of weeks ago, I thought. Our vote was 9-0-1. Districts 1 and 3 were absent. The abstention was from someone who was concerned about the reduction in staff, particularly as it pertains to housekeeping affairs. But our vote was 9-0-1, and we heartily endorse Chris Thurlow.
Thank you. Mr. von Keyserling with the Appointments Committee report.
We interviewed Ms. Thurlow on the 29th of January. We voted for her 12-0-0. She is, as I say, renomination. She is an extraordinarily energetic and dedicated person to this task, and anybody who's been involved with Nathaniel Witherell feels her handprint all over the place in her work. So we thought she was an excellent return.
Discussion on item 17. I may have neglected to ask for someone to move and second item 12. So item 12 now has officially been moved and seconded. Thank you. Continuing on, item 18, John Crary, our town administrator.
Resolved that the First Selectman is authorized to apply for and accept grants to execute agreements regarding said grants made by the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation under the Connecticut Clean Fuel Program, and such proceeds shall be added by the Controller to the appropriate revenue account. This is also a substitute resolution.
Thank you. Will member please move the adoption of the substitute resolution? The substitute resolution on item 18 has been moved and seconded. Who would like to begin? Mr. Wells with the report of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, this resolution permits the town to participate in the state's clean fuel program and must be in place prior to the next fiscal year, which will allow the town to buy clean fuel vehicles and have the state refund the incremental cost paid by the town. In general, alternative fuel or hybrid vehicles are more expensive than the gas-guzzling alternatives, and the state is prepared to provide financial incentives for the municipalities to buy clean fuel vehicles by picking up the difference in the cost. The passage of this resolution will allow the town and the state to enter into this arrangement. Our committee took up this matter last Monday evening. We had Amina Ahmad of the Law Department present this matter to us. Earlier, our committee had received the substitute resolution from the town clerk's office that was just read by the prior speaker that made some minor language changes from what is in the call. However, Kip Bergweger, who is serving as our liaison to the Budget Resolution Committee, pointed out that the proposed language did not conform to the language in the budget resolutions that we will review at our May budget meeting. Mr. Bergweger moved that we conform the language of this resolution to the language that will appear in our budget book. That motion was seconded, and our vote on the substitute resolution was 12-0-0. I can either read that now or do it after the other reports.
Why don't we get the second report, and I'll come right back to you. Vincent DeMarco, Chairman of our Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Transportation Committee met last Tuesday evening to take up this item, the authorization to participate in the Connecticut Clean Fuel Vehicle Program. First Selectman Peter Tessie attended and explained that the Board of Selectmen feels the town should move to become increasingly be more environmentally responsible. and that participation in the Connecticut Clean Fuel Program is one practical way to do so. Through reimbursement by state grants of the incremental cost or cost above that of non-clean fuel vehicles for hybrid or other cleaner fuel vehicles, the town could A, purchase these vehicles without spending more, B, help improve air quality, and C, help reduce costs. The average life cycle costs of hybrid vehicles may actually be less due to reduced maintenance requirements. He lauded the efforts of Fleet Director Betty Link, who has advocated for many years for the use of cleaner alternative fuels and measures to reduce fuel usage through more efficient vehicles and operation. It was noted also that the Transportation Committee 2 years ago made a recommendation that the fleet vehicle replacement guidelines be amended to require that these measures be included as criteria for selection of all replacements. This clean fuel vehicle program justifies those efforts. Also, Mr. Tessie confirmed that while there was no written policy that requires that all fleet vehicles be of domestic manufacture, Ms. Link has always tried to find the best domestic option for each application, which he and members of the Transportation Committee believe should continue as long as domestic options are available and reasonably comparable to foreign vehicles. It is expected that the fleet will include 4 hybrid Ford Escape SUVs in 2008 if this resolution is passed. It was also mentioned that one member of the Transportation Committee has been researching the benefits of biodiesel fuel along with the fleet director and will present her findings to the committee in the near future. The committee voted 11-0-0 with District 8 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 18. Mr. Wells, on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee.
The Legislative and Rules Committee substitute resolution reads as follows. Resolved that the First Selectman is authorized to apply for and accept grants and to execute agreements regarding said grants made by the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation under the Connecticut Clean Fuel Program, and such grants shall be added by the Comptroller to the appropriate revenue account.
All right, that being an amendment offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. We can adopt motions to amend upon unanimous consent. If there is any objection, we will proceed to take this up formally with discussion and a vote. Is there any objection to the adoption of the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend? Hearing none, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. Further, any discussion on item 18 as amended? Item 19 now comes before us. Lloyd Hubbs, our Commissioner of Public Works.
Item 19 is as it appears on the call. This is the appropriation of $87,000 into the Highway Maintenance Capital Account to reimburse for disaster repairs.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 19 has been moved and seconded. Pam Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. This item was presented to the Finance Committee by Commissioner Lloyd Hubb and Highway Superintendent Joe Roberto. During the April nor'easter, several town roads experienced damage to the surface, shoulder, drainage, and curbing on Parsonage Road, Ridgeview Drive, Grove Lane, and Brookside Drive. The repair work was completed in August of 2007 with funds from the department's 0607 and 0708 budgets. Of the $312.7 thousand cost incurred, FEMA reimbursed $225.7 thousand, leaving $87,000 to be funded as requested in this appropriation. As noted in the call, these costs were for debris removal, protective services, repairs, and hazardous mitigation. Money spent was intended for road work during 2008, and this is being requested tonight to be replaced as an interim appropriation. The Finance Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. David Malik, Chair of our Public Works Committee.
Mr. Moderator, our fellow members of the RTM. The committee met last Monday, March 3rd. Present was Joe Roberto, the Highway Superintendent, and Amy Siebert, the Deputy Commissioner. The item was covered well by the Finance Committee. One specific issue regarding this item and a later item, the FEMA rules are very clear as to what they will reimburse for and will not reimburse for, and it's a like in kind and quality, so you can't upgrade. Sorry. The work was completed as noted, and we need the money to do more work. 1100, District 3 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 19. Item 20 now comes before us. Once again, Commissioner Hubbs.
Item 20 is again as it appears on your call. This is the appropriation of $640,000 to a capital account to pay for primarily bridge repairs due to the nor'easter damage.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 20 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick with our Finance Committee report.
Okay. Good evening. This item was presented by Commissioner Lloyd Hub and Chief Engineer Dave Thompson. The item reflects cost incurred from the April 2007 nor'easter to repair several bridges. In particular, scour work, head wall replacement, and end wall, railing, and embankment repairs. Total estimated cost of these repairs is $640,000, which is being requested. FEMA has noted a reimbursement of $192,700 of the original application. FEMA funds up to 75% of approved cost estimates. As you can see, the approval was significantly less than the last item. They will only approve costs which they feel resulted directly from the storm that were not pre-existing. Another $500,000 is being released from the previously appropriated but canceled King Street Rye Lake Roundabout project. These appropriations or cost will cover the initial estimates. It is important to note, however, that these cost estimates are based on an initial preliminary design site assessment by the Beta Group and are not based on detailed engineering. Therefore, when this work is completed, the cost could very well increase as additional damage could be uncovered. An amended FEMA application could or would have to be made at that time. On the basis of the presentations, the Finance Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Discussion on item 20. Mr. Yes, let's get the report from Mr. Mellick of our Public Works Committee.
Yeah, I can see why maybe he passed over me. I'm not the most exciting public speaker. Thank you, though. Present March 3rd for the Public Works Committee was Joe Roberto, again the Highway Superintendent, Amy Siebert, and Lloyd Hubbs was present as well. This is a slightly more complicated set of projects, and that's why they are actually in the engineering division, not in the highway division. Highway division is simple repair, replacement, cleanup. Engineering requires work, design work, a little more planning and so forth. Again, like I mentioned on item 19, FEMA will not reimburse for projects to upgrade or where they feel there was a deficient condition to begin with, and sometimes you can prove it, sometimes you can't. This scour protection is one item where we were not given credit for, either because it wasn't there, one, because it got washed away, or two, it was never there in the first place. Most importantly with scour protection is safety. So in terms of engineering and putting this in place, it's necessary. Some bridge collapses countrywide have been in fact due to lack of scour prevention structures. So these are critical items. We do have the money currently allocated, so it's not in effect I think it was in the prior 2 years or last year's budget. So that money is now going to forward over to this. So the additional appropriation is actually much less than the $640,000. The Public Works Committee voted 11-0-0, District 3 absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on item 20. Item 21 now comes before us. Commissioner Hubbs.
Item 21 is as it appears on your call. This is the appropriation of $145,000 to the account for the J.J. Kennedy Force Main Pump Station to complete that project.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 21 has been moved and seconded. Ms. Frederick with our Finance Committee report.
Okay, good evening. This item was presented by Chief Engineer Dave Thompson. Because this project spans several budget cycles, the Finance Committee requested Mr. Thompson review all appropriations and compare that to the total cost incurred. We appreciated his effort of putting this information together, both a funding and an expenditure report, and presenting it to the committee. The Kennedy Garage Facility is located on Indian Field Road, just off Exit 4. Construction planning of the sanitary sewer pump station dates back to its initial conception and study in 2002, where 5 alternatives were subsequently reviewed. The initial budget approval for A&E was $74,000 in 2005, and the initial construction budget approval was $510,000 in 2005-2006. That was done at a design level of 30%. An increase of $234,000 occurred in 2006-2007, and that was to fund the addition of 2 bridge crossings and a gravity sewer to the design, and that design level was 70%. The third addition was $330,000, and that was appropriated in last year in 2007-2008 due to the result of the contract bidding and an overall increase in construction costs, which many of us are aware of. The total construction appropriation then was, including those 3 items, $1,074,000. The construction contract of $876,000 was awarded in June 2007, and construction began in August 2007, with a $90,000 consultant and administrative services contract and an additional permitting, utility, and other expenses cost of $50,000. The total actual cost to date have been approximately $1,020,000. The project ran into a number of unforeseen circumstances that increased construction costs an additional $120,000. This including a much more extensive rock than anticipated, and a number of other underground obstacles such as old foundations, a large foundation wall, empty tanks, etc., and a redesign that led to sewer pipe being rerouted and extended. In addition, the town needed to extend its consultant's contract for a cost of $30,000, additional utility and other miscellaneous costs of $50,000, which were noted in the call as contingency, but those things have been identified. These 2 have led to a total increased cost of $200,000. This, less the $55,000 remaining in the budget, resulted in the current request of $145,000. The sewer line is buried except for the Exit 4 bridge overpass. That is pending state reconstruction work. But the line is encased and well insulated to protect from freezing. Project benefits include replacing the failed septic system, which also has no room for expansion. The sewage will no longer have to be pumped on a monthly basis. Fleet will have a washing facility, which will ensure town property is better maintained with the removal of salt and debris. Also, it will be compliant with DEP discharge regulations. It is believed that this is a near final estimate, since the project is approximately 90%, maybe more, complete, and the town is under final reviews with the contractor. They are not quite at the punch list phase, we were told, but are pretty close, with completion expected April 1st. The vote by the Finance Committee was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. Mellick with the report of our Public Works Committee.
Thoroughly reported by Finance. I'll just touch on 1 or 2 items in addition. We met on the 3rd. David Thompson, Chief Engineer, was present along with Amy and Lloyd. What a long, strange trip this has been. Here we are the 3rd time. I'm not sure if there's been a 4th additional appropriation for an item, but let's hope not. The point actually I need to make is that this project was initially started with its initial placeholder value and an early level of design. And What this means is that we have these types of cost overruns. We went through within the committee this development process. We touched on some of the background as to why it was an old facility that was we bought for, I believe, $1, and we need to bring it up to current standards. And this does at least part of a very important part of that. So when we start projects very quickly, too early, we can end up having large change orders and large cost increases. And yes, in this case, a matter of well over 100%. The committee voted 11-0-0. District 3 was absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 21. Item 22 now comes before us. Betty Link, Fleet Director.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM, resolved that the sum of $42,000 be and the same is hereby appropriated to be added to the account 380-535 motor fuels and lubricants. It is as it appears on the call.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 22 has been moved and seconded. Pam Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
We have a lot of numbers tonight. This item was presented by John Query, representing the Fleet Department, our new town administrator. This increase was due primarily to the increase in the cost of fuel compared to our budgeted contract price, as well as some increase in fuel usage. As provided in the explanals, gasoline was budgeted at $2.17 per gallon compared to the $2.89 in the new contract and $2.84 in the interim period when we were not under contract. This increase in contract price was 72 cents. In addition, usage was budgeted at 212,000 gallons compared to actual usage of 216,000 gallons for an overage of 3,861. As well as 51 gallons overage in diesel, which was, by the way, a very good estimate. I don't know how she did that. The net amount over the budget was $83,000. Diesel, on the other hand, experienced prices below the budgeted values with a net amount under budget of $17,000. With an additional savings on oil and lube of $25,000, Fleet seeks a net appropriation of $42,000. It is important to note that gasoline contracts expired in December, during which Fleet purchased on a spot basis at a very favorable price. They didn't think that the cost at that time was favorable to enter into a longer-term contract. This did result in lower costs during December and ultimately, we believe, lower cost overall. It does point out a difference in our structure and approach to approving these types of contracts, and we are understand that the BET will be reviewing this process and maybe have a more coordinated effort. We applaud that effort. Another point of contention was the use of town vehicles which are taken home. This is a practice that is being reviewed with far fewer employees assigned cars than was past practice. Also, appropriateness of the selection of the type of car or truck and its implication for fuel usage is being reviewed. Finance voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Melick with our Public Works Committee report.
Again, on Monday, March 3rd, we met in Town Hall. Joe Roberto was still hanging around, Amy and Lloyd Hubson present as well. This is for the $42,000 as well identified by the Finance Committee's report. Three main items came up in the discussion amongst the Public Works Committee. One was the point of why didn't we have, if possible, a longer-term contract, which would have fixed the prices for a longer term. Wondering whether the current budget for next year takes into account the full amount of cost increases that have been occurred. And lastly, what are we doing as a town for the increased fuel usage and to limit fuel consumption in general. The committee voted 10-1-0, District 3 absent. The one negative vote was the concern that this has occurred in the past and that better controls should have been put in place initially, either one, as I mentioned, for the ensuring you had a longer-term contract if it was possible, in addition to better management of the vehicles, reducing mileage, and also, as was discussed already in the report, going to either biodiesel or hybrid cars just to limit consumption. 10-1-0, District 3 absent.
Thank you. And it is a pleasure to welcome the new chairman of our Town Services Committee, Evan Delman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Town Services met Tuesday night with Mr. Crary. Everything's already been said. Hold one question, and that is, why are we getting 89 octane rather than 87? Director Link met with us tonight on item number 23, but she did explain that the police need the higher performance, so that is why she's not using 87. We voted 11-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 22. Mr. DeMarco.
The Transportation Committee took this item up together with item 23. They were not referred to us, but members felt that it might be appropriate since the fleet budget is referred to this committee for review annually. Having just reiterated for new members during the discussion of item 18 how conscientious our fleet director is about efficiency and thorough and consistent she is with her books, considering this and recognizing that this is an interim appropriation we have come to expect for reasons every year beyond her control, after minimal discussion that included the questions reportedly raised by the Town Services Committee the previous evening, the vote was 11-0-0 in favor of both items.
Thank you. Discussion on item 22. Item 26 now comes before us. Mr. Von Keyserling.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is one of the rare privileges the Appointment Committee has of nominating for your consideration and appointment. Item 26 reads, resolved that the following named person nominated by the RTM Appointments Committee be appointed a member of the Condemnation Commission for a term expiring 3/31/10. Gordon A. Ennis.
Thank you. That being offered on behalf of our Appointments Committee, it does not require a second. Reports on item 22nd. That is now before us. May we have the reports on that, Mr. Von Keyserling?
There are no other committee reports?
Well, there's no one standing there except you. So
there he is. No one left standing.
Peter Berg, Vice Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Hello again. Thank you. The Land Use Committee interviewed Mr. Ennis and Mr. Kroll last Monday evening. They were nominated by the RTM Appointments Committee to the Condemnation Committee for terms expiring 3/31/2010. They are replacing two incumbents, and the RTM appoints the Condemnation Committee every 2 years. The question that we asked them involved the taking of private properties under eminent domain, pardon me, such as was done in New London. They both indicated that they were opposed to the use of eminent domain for such private projects. Our vote on Mr. Ennis and Mr. Kroll were 12-0-0.
Okay. Mr. Von Keyserling, we are now taking up Mr. Ennis.
If I might, Mr. Moderator, let me make a statement about the Condemnation Commission, and that because we did all of these separately going forward, but it's basically one general report. At the Appointments Committee met on February 26th to interview candidates for the Condemnation Commission. Despite the adverse weather, the meeting was well attended and drew some interest from the public. We had 8 highly qualified candidates for 5 positions. After a full, lengthy, and thoughtful process of presentations, questions, and comments from the public, each member of the Appointments Committee voted for their 5 choices for this commission. As it so happened, on the first ballot, 5 of the candidates polled 7 or more votes, a majority of the Appointments Committee, and 3 candidates polled less than that 7 votes. When considering the composition of the Condemnation Committee, the Appointments Committee members took into consideration the skills and experiences that would be complementary to a highly functioning commission and the mission ahead for the commission that we envision. I would like to just make one further comment. We did not, in our vote, and it should be clearly understood, we had 8 qualified candidates. Every 2 years, this commission comes up for a re-staffing by your appointment. There were 5 incumbents, and there were 3 new candidates. We picked what we felt were the 5 most qualified candidates. Nobody was replacing anyone. It was just simply a fresh vote. So it should be understood that we had a high regard for those people who were not picked, but they were not in as high esteem as the 5 that were. So I want to make that clear.
Discussion on item 26. Item 27 now comes before us. Mr. Von Keisling, why don't you just introduce the remaining?
Certainly, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Your Honor, sir. 27 is on the, as you see it on the call, for a Mr. Richard F. Kroll, Jr. for the Condemnation Commission. 28 is Mr. Neil Ritter, who is a renomination to the Condemnation Commission. 29 is Mr. Robert Perry, a renomination to the Condemnation Commission. And number 30 is Mr. Joe Riccardi, a renomination to the Condemnation Commission. And that those 5 should complete the roster for that commission.
All right, those nominations are now before us, having been offered by one of our committees. Mr. Berg, did you want to add anything to your report on the Condemnation Commission nominees?
Yes, sir. I just want to clarify that the Land Use Committee interviewed Mr. Ennis and Mr. Kroll together, and then we interviewed because they were new members of the commission, and then we interviewed Mr. Ritter, Mr. Perry, and Mr. Riccardi together because they have already served terms and they're being reappointed. And I'll just mention that Mr. Ritter is an attorney. He's the only attorney on the committee, and he has served 2 terms. And he made the point that he believes the town should follow the charter as closely as possible. Mr. Perry said that he felt the Department of Public Works didn't do its job at the North Mianus sewer project. He felt Public Works was not providing maps when requested and not until the project was completed. Mr. Riccardi also said he was frustrated by the North Mianus sewer project and said that the incumbents did a good job under the circumstances. Our vote of the Land Use Committee was 12-0-0 on all appointments.
Thank you. Discussion on items 26 through 30. All right. Before calling for the last item, I do have the results of the vote on our consent calendar items. Those were items 2 through 9, 13, 14, 24, and 32. Those in favor, 185. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 0. Those items have carried. And the last of our combined items, Mr. Von Keisling. This is item 31.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We, on the Appointments Committee, interviewed the candidates before you, the nominees, for the Claims Committee over a period of a month or so. I would like to take just a moment to thank my committee. We have interviewed in the last 6 weeks some 40 or so people for various positions, and they've been doing long and hard service, and they've stuck with it sometimes in the late hours, and I wanted to thank them for that. The good news is we have one more meeting to go, perhaps, and we'll be finished for the year. The item 31 is before you. It's resolved the following named persons nominated by the RTM Appointments Committee be appointed a regular member of the RTM Claims Committee for terms expiring 12/31/09. Jane Arnone, Robert L. Bierman, John H. Blankley, Francis Kip Bergweger, Edward D. Didakis, Lloyd Hull, Edward Manganiello, David Mellick, and John Schulman. I would like to mention that Mr. Blankley is a new member to this committee, a new nomination to this committee from District 10, and the rest are all renominations after a series of terms of service.
All right. Item 31 is now before us, having been offered on behalf of by one of our standing committees. Mr. Wells, with the report of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this matter up of the nine nominees last Monday evening. All of these members are returning except for John Blankley, who will be a new member. We have 4 members on our Legislative and Rules Committee who are also members of the Claims Committee, so we couldn't think of anything bad to say about them. Our vote was 8 in favor, none opposed, with 4 abstentions. The 4 abstentions are the members of our committee who are also on the Claims Committee who chose not to vote for themselves.
Thank you. Discussion on item 31.
Sir, I do have a report.
Okay, Mr. Von Keyserling.
I just wanted to say that while we voted on these people and were very secure in our nomination, I'd have to make a comment. After the Appointments Committee nominated its slate for the Claims Committee, which includes Mr. John Schulman, a challenge to Mr. Schulman's qualification was raised by Mr. Romeo to me. Mr. Romeo claimed that while he did not question Mr. Schulman's personal qualifications and that he believed Mr. Schulman would probably continue to serve on the Claims Committee in the future, he believed that Mr. Schulman was not a legal member of this RTM and therefore not qualified to be appointed a member of the Claims Committee. The question arises from the definition of a vacancy on the RTM, and can a vacancy legally exist to be filled before a term starts on January 1st? The liability of the town would be that a claimant could move to overturn an action of the Claims Committee or a settlement agreement because a voting member was not properly a member. I subsequently called the Secretary of State's Director of Elections Enforcement, Mr. Arthur Champagne, and put the question to him. His response generically was that a vacancy cannot exist outside a term. However, he stated that his office could make no direct interpretations on this matter since it was within the charter, code, and special acts of the town, and this area of interpretation was in the jurisdiction of the town attorney. The facts of the matter are District 8 acted in good faith under written instruction from the town attorney in filling the vacancy. Appointment Committee acted in good faith on the information available at the time. The town attorney directed the filling of a vacancy by which Mr. Schulman was appointed to the RTM. If Mr. Schulman recuses himself on matters concerning, in this case, particularly the North Mianus sewer lawsuit, no liability would derive from that lawsuit to the town. A confirmation vote by District 8, perhaps before the next April meeting, would remove any question at all. The questions involved are outside the purview of the Appointments Committee, and therefore we can only bring this matter to the RTM's attention, as I think it properly should be. The solution to this issue is better handled by the town attorney, the moderator, and perhaps the moderator's special committee on RTM rules under Ms. Joan Caldwell. Thank you.
Discussion on item 31. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Combined items 10, 12, 17 through 22, and 26 through 31, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue with the business of the meeting. Item 1 now comes before us. In fact, item 1 is now presently before us. This item is the appointment of Ricky Capoza to be a member of the Board of Parks and Recreation for a term expiring March 31, 2012. This was postponed from our January meeting to our March meeting. This is now before us. May we have the reports of the committees that considered this item, beginning with Karen Sadekhan, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening. Ricky Capoza was a no-show for the second time. The first time was in January when I reported to you that while he did not show up for that interview, my committee at that time felt confident in voting on him, as we had interviewed him last September, and he was approved by a vote of 10-0-0. The vote in January was 11-0-1. One delegate had not met him in September because I hadn't been a member of the group. And that vote was a result of the committee being quite satisfied that they did not need to re-interview him, as we had interviewed him 4 months earlier in September. Also at the January meeting, Rick Wellington, chair of the Parks and Recreation Board, spoke on Ricky's behalf, telling us that he was an enthusiastic and active new participant on the board. As you all know, due to the fact that the Appointments Committee had not interviewed him in January, this item was postponed until tonight's meeting. I expected that our committee would go ahead and interview him last week, now that 2 more months had elapsed. Ricky Capozzo did not show up to be interviewed. Mr. Wellington was present and reached Ricky on his cell phone, but he was out of town with a business commitment and couldn't return in time for the meeting. I believe that he had been reminded by Mr. Wellington to attend the meeting, and I myself had left him phone messages. I had not heard from him prior to the meeting. Based on this, the committee took no action on his nomination. I would like to comment that he called me the next day to apologize for not being present and indicated to me that I needed to have his current contact numbers, although he had gotten my phone message reminding him to attend the meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keisling, the report of our Appointments Committee.
We saw Mr. Capozzo somewhere in the dim past, and we interviewed. My recollection is that he was well respected by his board that he's on. The chairman spoke highly in favor of him. He's doing important work on trying to figure out harbor management in the town, which is a large area of our Parks and Rec responsibility. He was taken as a very valuable member. I'm sorry that his business schedule has caused a problem for your committee.
Discussion on item 1. Karen Sadekhan.
Mr. Moderator, I would like to move that we postpone action on Ricky Capozzo until my committee can interview him in April.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to postpone item number 1 to our next meeting. Was that Ms. Sadekhan? To the April meeting? Okay. It has been moved and seconded to postpone item 1 to our April meeting. Discussion on that motion to postpone. All right. This being a procedural matter, I will call for a voice vote. All those in favor of postponing the appointment of Ricky Capozzo to the Board of Parks and Recreation to our April meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. The next item to come before us is item number 11. Lynn Lavery, Selectman.
Item number 11, resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency for a term expiring March 31st, 12. Martin Kagan.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 11 has been moved and seconded. Franklin Bloomer, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the town meeting. Mr. Kagan was unable to meet with the Land Use Committee at our regular meeting last Monday evening, and we met with him and also with Mr. Robert Siska, item 15, this evening immediately ahead of this meeting. We interviewed the 2 candidates jointly. Mr. Siska is a candidate for renomination as an alternate member. Mr. Kagan is a regular member, and he is being renominated for an additional term as a regular member. Much of the discussion that we had with the 2 individuals who we interviewed together had to do with the meeting at which the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency approved the Stanwich School, and that discussion was led by the 2 members, the member and the alternate from District 8 who were present. The issue had to do with the fact, as asserted by the persons from District 8, that the Commission had taken action on this item, notwithstanding a recommendation from the staff that action not be taken at that meeting. Apparently, the public comment period had expired, and therefore public comment could no longer be received on the item, but there was a question as to whether the conditions to the permit that was ultimately granted had been adequately fleshed out at that meeting. The vote after that discussion was 8 in favor, 1 opposed, that being the delegate from District 8, with 3 districts absent, those districts being Districts 2, 6, and 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keisling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
We interviewed Mr. Kagan on the 26th of February. He's an environmental planner with deep background. We voted for him 12-0-0.
Discussion on item 11. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 11, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item number 15 now comes before us. Peter Crumbine with that resolution.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed an alternate member of Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency for a term expiring 3/31/12. Robert Siska, it is as in your call.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 15 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Bloomer with our Land Use Committee report.
As I mentioned in connection with item 11, we interviewed Mr. Siska this evening. I've described the discussion that we had. The vote on Mr. Siska was 9 in favor, none opposed, with 3 absent, those 3 being Districts 2, 6, and 9.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keisling with our Appointments Committee report.
We interviewed Mr. Siska on February 26th also. We approved of him 12-0-0. He is a lawyer in real estate but has no conflicts. We questioned very deeply and thoroughly on any problem that might be with a conflict of interest, and nobody on the committee felt there was a problem.
Discussion on item 15. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 15, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item 16 now comes before us. Mr. Crumbine.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed a member of the Board of Social Services for a term expiring 3/31/2011. Kimberly Terra-Noir.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 16 has been moved and seconded. Jerry Isaacson with the report of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We interviewed Kimberly Terra-Noir on last Tuesday. Her background is business planning and financial consulting. She is presently the chairman of the Board of Social Services. And while she has been on the board, she's seen the staff reduced and the demand for services increase. Budgets remained essentially flat for the past couple of years. When she first went on the board, she felt it was very much in a defensive mode, having a longtime commissioner terminated and a new commissioner taking over. She now feels that they are much more proactive with a changed structure and greater concern with compiling data on caseloads and placement of staff. Our vote was 9-1-2. The 2 abstentions they felt that the candidate was eminently qualified, but they would like to see more social services staff on the board. The no vote was from District 8 representative, who is an employee of the Department of Social Services and the subject of a Board of Ethics advisory opinion, which stated that he should not vote on matters that pertain to the department.
Thank you. Mr. Von Keisling with the report of our Appointments Committee.
We interviewed Ms. Terra-Noir on Valentine's Day, February 14th. The vote was 11-0-0 with District 3 absent. This is a renomination, has been mentioned as a chairman of a board in a very difficult circumstance. The question is really one of keeping balance in the board so that it can move forward. It's been shaken up so much over the period of time that I think there's a feeling that it needs to have a little settlement there and be able to find its footing to go on and create some benefit and change.
Thank you. Discussion on item 16. Mr. Edwards, District 8.
Thank you very much. My name is Nick Edwards. I point out that I am an employee of the Town of Greenwich and Department of Social Services for the last 15 years. It's been my great honor to serve our community in this capacity. I rise to raise the following points, which are a great concern, and I'm a little baffled why others don't quite see it this way. We spent $115,000, oddly enough it never came before us, but minor point, to evaluate the Department of Social Services. And with this, there were 4 conclusions, 4 recommendations. There's been a great effort to implement the recommendations, except for one, which was the outside consultants had recommended that we increase the number of social workers on the Board of Social Services. Sounds kind of odd, right? When the person who was before the Health and Human Services Committee from the Board of Health, she's an MD, and I said, why would you want MDs on the Board of Health? And she very articulately said how she has interest in the health and well-being of the community. That's her job, her life, her studies. As we've heard tonight, she has brought information forward within the field of health to really show things that the board should focus on. So it seems the department of obvious department that, yes, it's good to have doctors on the health department. We've also seen that in other areas like P&Z, the importance of having people who are land use engineers, people who are very firmly involved in that field. I think it's a great note that the selectman, Mr. Tessie, in the Greenwich Time, and I hope it was accurately quoted, but he had mentioned that in considering nominations for P&Z, that this is an opportunity to really try to appoint people on P&Z who are very sensitive to floor area ratio issues and other issues that are really gripping this community. I thought that was quite bold because he said once we appoint them, they're in there for 3 years. So my first general point is that I rise that the nomination for Ms. Tenoir not be approved, and to send a message to the SNAC committee and Mr. Tessie that we really need to, at this juncture, take qualified candidates, which did appear before SNAC, who are legitimately in the field of social work, to really staff this committee. Just that you need like 3 or 4, 2 or 3, fine. The second thing that really bothered me in, again, Ms. Tenoir is an industrial engineer. She has risen to becoming chairman. My concern is one time they had on their agenda had an executive session. I raised my hand, I brought it to their attention, as I had done twice before over the last several years, that their desire to have this executive session for personnel purposes was not in legal order. That according to the FOI chairman from the state of Connecticut, who had addressed us on 2 occasions, and I asked him specifically about the nature of personnel matters, he said it had to do with a specific person. For instance, the fire inspector chose to have an open executive session. It has to do with a specific person. On that agenda previously that night, they had talked about the unfilled positions, there's public comment. Then they went into public session on the unfilled positions, and I said, this is not in order. And I gave a copy of the statute that I had gotten from the law department 2 years ago that they had given to me. I gave them a copy of the forms that had been given by the FOI chairman, and they still couldn't figure out why they couldn't go behind closed doors. I said it's in the public's interest that in this case we all address the issue of the unfilled positions. Well, they decided to ignore what I said. I asked that it be included in the minutes as a concern that I had that it was not in legal order, and Ms. Tenoir said she's not going to put it in the minutes, which shocked me. So I'm a little concerned that we have somebody of the stature of a chairman not being at least respectful of an RTM member, 3rd term, member of the Health and Human Services Committee, and somebody that has provided knowledge and information to that committee, to that board, over the last on and off 10 years. So anyway, I rise tonight, this evening, that we make a statement to bring it back to Mr. Tessie, that we make sure that we try to have this board actively staffed. Last point is, otherwise we continue promoting the chaos that's been in this board. We don't see that in the health department. We don't see that in other areas where there are very highly experienced people in their fields, at least 2, 3, or 4 of them on that committee. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 16. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item 16, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the results of the vote on our combined items. Those were items 10, 12, 17 through 22, and 26 through 31. Those in favor, 179, opposed 0, abstaining 6. Those items have carried. Item 23 now comes before us. Betty Link, our Fleet Director.
Resolved that the sum of $83,000 being the same is hereby appropriated to be added to the account number 380-351, parts for automotive equipment. It is as it appears on the call.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 23 has been moved and seconded. Pamela Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Good evening. This item was presented by John Query, our town administrator. The request is for an increase in the parts budget due to higher than normal usage. While it was noted there are additional 5 cars, actually I think there may be a few more. We had a subsequent report. It was believed that the increase, however, was due to above average and unusual repairs, which they hope would revert to normal levels. That's not something that the fleet department itself could control. It's really in the department's hands to control usage and treatment of the vehicles. To receive an additional, we received an additional report subsequent to the meeting, and this reflects growth in the number of vehicles, but not a similar growth in the fleet budget. A big push in fleet, as noted earlier, is also to the use of hybrid vehicles, which would serve to reduce oil, although may not, I guess it's yet to be seen the impact on parts. In addition, parts have become more expensive, particularly tires, as was noted in our meeting, as that's an oil-based product. Finance voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. David Melick with the report of our Public Works Committee.
Thank you. On item 23, we met on Monday, March 3rd. Present again with Joe Roberto, Amy Siebert, Lloyd Hubbs. The committee actually took up temporary residence in Missouri, and we were in the Show Me State because we found that the explanos were insufficient to adequately process the information. We voted 2 in favor, 2 against, 7 abstaining on the item, with District 3 absent. And the reason was we just felt that the explanos were not sufficient. I had contacted Betty Link, who was out of town, and she provided the detailed backup, which consisted of a full workbook, and I had disseminated that to the committees. Part of our discussion after or during the item was the need for the ask, figuring it was items such as single high-cost items that were not planned for, extra usage, and increasing prices. As we know, not only petroleum products but tires are also made from oil. So that was most likely part of it. The worksheet did identify specifically what the needs are. But if you notice, there were two negative votes. And part of that was just general concern for controls, because I believe we did have an interim appropriation for tires. It may have been for police tires last year. And members of the committee are starting to ask questions about, 1, are we budgeting properly to begin with? 2, are we implementing our policies and procedures as effectively as possible? And then there were two positive votes, thinking that it was a fair ask, and given current economic conditions, that we should move forward. And I see that Betty is here today. 2-7, District 3 absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Delman with the report of our Town Services Committee.
Town Services met with Mr. Crary on Tuesday night. There were several questions that he was unable to answer. We did contact Fleet Director Link via email and phone. She sent us a spreadsheet that explained everything. We met with her again tonight. Everything was explained to our satisfaction. We voted 9-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. DeMarco, did you want to add anything? Thank you. Discussion on item 23. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item 23, and proceed to poll your delegation. I do have the results of the vote on item number 11, which was the appointment of Martin Kagan to the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. Those in favor, 175, opposed 10, abstaining 2. That item has carried. The vote on item 15, the appointment of Robert Siska to the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. Those in favor, 183, opposed 0, abstaining 0. That item has carried. Item 25 now comes before us. Mr. Crary, our Town Administrator.
Resolved to amend the Greenwich Municipal Code, Article 6, waiting period for demolition permits, as presented in the call.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 25 has been moved and seconded. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, our committee took this item up last Monday evening. This resolution seeks to extend the time period in which to file an objection to a demolition permit from 20 days to 45 days. And if an objection is filed, the resolution would extend the waiting period for the granting of a demolition permit from the current 90-day period to 180 days. We heard from 4 people who addressed our committee: Lloyd Hull of the Historic District Commission, Donald Hamilton from District 7, Paul Pugliese, a Greenwich architect, realtor, and developer, who spoke in opposition. We also heard from Amina Ahmad of the Law Department, who provided us with a legal opinion that the resolution is in legal order. She advised us that effective October 1, 2007, the Connecticut Legislature enacted Public Act 07-26, which provides for an extension of the waiting period from a maximum of 90 days to a maximum of 180 days, which is incorporated into our town code, our town ordinance, section 6316. She also said the town is empowered to make the change to our town ordinance and section 316 and 318 by extending the time period during which the objection may be filed. Mr. Hull reported to us that over the last few years there has been an average of 80 teardowns per year in Greenwich, and he argued that the extension to file an objection from 20 to 45 days is necessary because the Historic District Commission meets only once a month, and a 20-day window in which to file an objection could be thwarted by a well-timed demolition permit application, so that the Historic District Commission would not have the time to do an adequate investigation of the property to determine its historical significance. Mr. Hall also believes that the extension of the waiting period from 90 to 180 days is in the town's best interest because it would give the town and interested groups time to consider alternatives to demolition and to present those alternatives to the homeowner, or perhaps to have the time to raise money to attempt to purchase the property from the homeowner if that is feasible. Mr. Pugliese spoke in opposition to the resolution, especially insofar as it related to the extension from the 90-day waiting period to 180 days. He believes the town should create an inventory of the properties that it deems to have historical significance so that current homeowners and potential purchasers of these properties could know of the possibility for restrictions on their ownership rights. He also thought that rather than penalizing the owners for seeking a demolition, there should be consideration for giving incentives to the homeowner to maintain the property with renovations rather than tearing the properties down by offering tax credits or FAR variances. While our committee saw merit in the proposal to extend the objection period from 20 to 45 days to make sure that all interested parties would have the opportunity to be notified and the opportunity to file an objection, there was no support for extending the waiting period from 90 to 180 days. No one could offer us a clear reason why the opponents to a demolition needed the additional 90-day waiting period, and our committee was therefore left with the impression that it merely served as a financial penalty to the demolition applicant. We unanimously believe that the 90-day waiting period should not be extended. We then considered a motion to amend the resolution to decrease the objection period from 45 to 30 days and to decrease the waiting period from 180 days back to the original 90-day waiting period. That motion was seconded, and our vote on that was 2 in favor, 10 opposed, so that motion to amend failed. We then took up another motion, which was seconded, which was to shorten the waiting period in Section 313 from 180 days to 90 days. That is essentially leaving the ordinance unchanged as to that waiting period. That motion passed 12-0-0, and so at the appropriate time, Mr. Moderator, I will offer that amendment to Section 313. Our vote on the resolution as amended was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Peter Berg with the Land Use Committee report.
Good evening again. The Land Use Committee took up item 25 last Monday. We heard from Paul Hopper and later from Lloyd Hull, both of the Historic District Commission. As Mr. Wells just explained, there's a new state law that allows these proposals, that is an increase in the demolition wait period from 90 days to 180 days, and an increase in the window to object to a demolition from 20 days to 45 days. And they told us that the story of the town is told through its buildings, that there are 80 buildings a year that are demolished that are 60 years old or older. And this proposal is intended to buy time. There were many questions. They were asked if it is unfair. They asked if it's unfair to owners of lower-priced houses, which tend to fall into this category. We asked, is 180 days an unfair burden on homeowners? Can quote, an angry neighbor, unquote, throw a monkey wrench into someone's project? In all cases, the advocates indicated that they didn't consider these to be problems. The advocates had, however, no statistics on the effectiveness of this proposal. They estimated that 2 to 5 out of 100 of these older structures can be saved as a result of this proposal. Paul Puglisi then spoke in opposition. He introduced himself as a member of the Architectural Review Committee, but not speaking for the Architectural Review Committee. He contends that the proposal will not be effective to preserve historic buildings, that owners will lose their bank financing because of the length of the delays, and that it's simply too late to save a structure once it is on the market for sale. That instead what the town needs is some type of incentive program instead of punitive programs, and that the town needs a database of its important historic structures. Our vote in the Land Use Committee on this item was 8-4-0. District 7 voted no because although this is a worthy goal, he felt the periods are too long. It will impose an undue burden on the homeowner who will subsidize the owner. District 9 agreed that 180 days is excessive. District 11 also agreed that and said it hurts people who can least afford it. And District 12 agreed with those arguments as well.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Mr. Moderator, on page 9 of the call, at the bottom, section 313, the Legislative and Rules Committee amendment deletes the words that are underlined 180 day and inserts in its place the original language, which is just to its left and which is now interlined, which is a 90-day, so that it would our amendment would have it read as it was prior to the resolution, which is there is hereby imposed a 90-day waiting period before granting any permit. The rest of it is as it appears in the call.
Thank you. All right, that being a motion to amend offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second and is currently before us. Discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend by deleting the 180-day language and replacing it with a 90-day language. Discussion on that motion to amend. All right, Lloyd Hull, Mr. Hull, you have the floor. Lloyd Hull, District 10.
I'm on Member District 10 and also on the Historic District Commission. We thought hard and long about this. The enabling statute was passed back in April, and the Board of Selectmen unanimously approved this on the 24th of January. Now, nothing about this is onerous. We have a stock of houses that are being repeated torn down at a very fast gait, and soon we won't have very many houses to look at. 84 or 84 a year is a tremendous amount. We have to get some control over it. Now, the Legislative Committee wants to change this. If I remember when I was chairman of the Rules Committee, they could pass on the legal aspect, but not on the substance of the matter. That's up to the substantive committee, so I think that may be out of order here. Now, there's an out on this, which is not part of the state legislation, and that is if within 5 days after the application has to be put in, there's a 20-day waiting period, which we wanted to increase to 45. If they qualify into that, and there's no complaint within that 45 days, it's gone. So really the 180 days doesn't count unless it's a really desperate situation. So I think that's sort of onerous. The real problem is whether you want to save this town, the beauty of this town, which has made it the pride of the country, the pride of our state, and the beauty of it. If we keep tearing down these houses and we don't keep track of it, we hurt the townscape forever. The Historic District Commission is charged with reviewing these houses, and reviewing 84 is very difficult in a 12-month period. We meet once a month, and we take pictures of it, we vote on it. There's only been 2 or 3 last year that we put a stop on, and that was very helpful. To change this from the original proposal would be an error and a mistake. I heartily wish you vote the change as unanimously approved by the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Hull, I apologize. I don't know if you were raising a point of order formally. My understanding...
My point of order is that I don't think the Rules Committee should pass on anything but the legal procedure, not the substance.
Oh, okay. If that was the point of order, then I will rule that it is not well taken. Our Legislative and Rules Committee, from time to time, will opine on the merits as well as whether something is in legal order, and we do look to them for that advice when they believe it appropriate to give. Further discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend. Mr. Bloomer, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening again. I speak in my individual capacity. I was not at the Land Use Committee meeting last week, which Mr. Berg has just reported on. I rise to oppose the Legislative and Rules Committee amendment and to urge you to adopt the item 25 before you as it appears in the call. You've heard a lot about this enabling legislation, which was passed by the state just last year. The purpose of that legislation was to slow down the demolition of historic structures, which is a phenomenon which is occurring not just in Greenwich, but across the state. In Greenwich, most of the historic structures that have been demolished by developers, not by individual homeowners. Unfortunately, many developers have little regard for the historic or architectural value of the structure being demolished, or how the structure contributes to the streetscape or to the sense of place, the sense of what Greenwich is. Too often, well-scaled houses have been replaced by larger ones, and this tear-down, max-out trend has been roundly deplored by many residents speaking at the recent hearings on the Plan of Conservation and Development. As we heard earlier this evening, this has environmental consequences as well, because these large houses are causing, according to a number of the nominees who were interviewed, the increased flooding that we've been experiencing recently. I hope most of you have read Mrs. Richardson's excellent memo in the Explanos. She makes it clear, I think, that the existing time periods simply do not give the Historic District Commission sufficient time either to decide whether or not to delay a demolition, or if it decides to do so, to have a meaningful dialogue with the property owner that might save the historic structure. There are incentives in place for preserving historic structure, and these are briefly described in the Explanos. The property owner may not be aware of them. That's the point of the dialogue. It's important also to bear in mind how infrequently the Historic District Commission has invoked its right to delay a demolition. Last year, it did so only once. Apart from saying that a delay is a delay, it seems to me that the argument against longer waiting periods come down to saying that the existing waiting periods have been ineffective to prevent the demolition of many historic structures. And that, of course, is why the state acted. In any case, it does not seem to me to be a reason not to enact longer waiting periods. If the existing waiting periods aren't doing the job, obviously we need to try something different. The state has seen the need. The state has given us a tool to deal with it. Let's take advantage of it. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend. Yes, sir. No, yes, please come forward.
My name is Bob Maddox. I'm from District 11. And tonight everyone's talked about preserving the historical nature of the town of Greenwich. And frankly, I don't have a problem with the 180 days if the Historical Commission is the one who's putting in the application. If it's left wide open so your neighbor or somebody else can stop you from moving on it, then I think it's very unfair to property owners in the town of Greenwich. So I don't know whether there would be. I'm not going to be able to make a proposal that it be only in the case of the Historical Society or a Historical Commission putting that in, but I think it's very unfair from the Board of Selectmen to say, I've got a house built in 45 that's more than 500 square feet, and if my neighbor doesn't want me to move on that thing for 180 days, I've got a 45-day waiting period plus 180, then it really slows down the capacity of me being able to do something.
Christine Edwards, District 8.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, clerk, and colleagues. Property rights are probably one of the most basic parts of our constitutional rights that we have. My desire to do something with my own property. We keep thinking that everyone who's going to do a tear down is going to be a big developer putting up a huge 12,000 square foot house. And actually this really falls very unfairly on the kind of like the middle class that's still left in Greenwich who wants to do some expansion to their home that may be under or over 500 square feet. The 180-day waiting period, though I understand what Mr. Hull has said and others regarding trying to keep property that's historic or charming or whatever. But some houses that are out there that may be over 60 years old have charm kind of up to here. It's not necessarily the best of houses, the most beautiful of houses. And I just want to bring to the group's attention that one house that people have been really crying a lot about on Mayo Avenue in Belhaven has been for sale for 5 years. I think we've had enough notice in the paper that if this was a historic house we wanted to keep, we could have come together and bought it if it was that important. Bringing attention to another house that's been for sale for at least 3 years in the paper, dates to about 1750. It's as old as Putnam Cottage. If you want to save that, that's one carry. Go look at it. Anyone remember the old tea house? Anyone? It used to be a tea house many years ago. But we have a number of different homes like that scattered throughout Greenwich that if we do want to have some sort of monetary saving that we want to make these historic and keep them or put them into special historic districts as we've done on Taconic, for instance, then that's something that we can do. But in terms of the general homeowner, this really doesn't do anything except have a view of punishment and time. And if I'm buying a house that I want to do some demolition to and some addition to, financing, as I said, is a very big issue, and to take a demo from 90 days to 180 may wind up having just the opposite effect, which is that people will be putting their homes on the market for sale with a demo permit already in place. So the 180 days really does not do us really that good that we may perceive to have, and if keeping historic homes is really the ideal, then we need to go out on tours and find those historic homes, list them, and perhaps put money together to keep them. If you bought a house that was a Section 8 house, you can get a very subsidized loan to fix it up. And if you keep it for 15 years renting to Section 8s, that loan can be forgiven. I remember once addressing that at a land trust who said, oh, we want to not tear houses down. And I said, well, I've got an old house. It's over 60 years old. Unfortunately, it was under 500 square feet. But no one's going to give me an interest-free loan to rehab that home. And if I'm looking at a modular for $60 a square foot versus $300 a square foot to rehab, then, I mean, it's only sensible if you're in that bracket where you can't afford the $300 per square foot to do extensive historic renovation, you have to look at other opportunities. Property rights are a very strong thing, and what we're really doing, those of you who don't like eminent domain, we're in effect taking for 90 days someone's right to that house. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend. Mr. Wells, to be followed by Elizabeth Campbell.
The first item that I want to bring up is not related to my resolution. It's just a typo that Ms. Frederick actually pointed out to me that we should have noted in our committee, which is Section 316. The number 20 should have been interlined, so that should be corrected regardless of the resolution. That should be taken out.
All right. I'm sorry. Give me this again.
On page 10,
right.
Section 316, if you go to the next to the last line where 45 is inserted and 20 days is taken out, the number should be interlined as well.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm speaking on this item personally and not on behalf of my committee. I think the thing that's most noticeable to me is that the proponents of the 180-day waiting period have not offered us anything to indicate why it is that they need the extra 90 days to get something accomplished. What is it that they can't accomplish in 90 days that they need 180 days to do? That hasn't been articulated at all. I think that the fact of the matter is it just merely provides a penalty to homeowners or to developers. It doesn't really matter who the homeowner is that they're going to. They haven't articulated at all what it is that they need the extra time to do, which to me means it's just a penalty without any real purpose. The second thing is that Mr. Bloomer pointed out that there are problems with the size of the houses that are being built in place of these historic homes. That's not a matter that this resolution is going to resolve. That's something that planning and zoning has to resolve, perhaps by having a second look at the FAR restrictions and do things that have more to do with the site and the size of the building built on the site.
Thank you. Elizabeth Campbell, District 5.
Good evening. The first thing I'd like to say in response to the previous speaker is that this legislation was passed by the state in May, so it's sort of already done. And I don't think it can be fine-tuned from 180 days, say, to 120.
Well, I'm sorry. We were authorized by the state, is that correct? To adopt such a provision. It is not imposed on us by the state.
I meant, but it's set up for 180 days, not...
All right, I thought you said it's already done.
I'm sorry, I'm just saying the state has passed this. The Board of...
Continue, Ms. Campbell.
The Board of Selectmen have endorsed this request of the Historic District Commission, and I hope that RTM members will support their decision. For those of you who attended the recent hearings asking for input from residents about important issues for the new plan of conservation and development, you will recall that the demolition of well-scaled houses, many of historic value, was a subject of major concerns for many, many residents. More time is needed for the Commission to do their work. I want to give you an example which was in the report. Last year there were 74 houses up for consideration, and the Commission placed only one stay. The huge majority of houses that someone wants to demolish are owned by builders. This extension from 20 days to 45 days of the filing of an objection to a demolition.
Ms. Campbell, right now we are merely taking up the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend the 180-day provision back to 90 days.
Right.
That's it.
I'm saying I'm opposing that. I'm sorry.
I know, but you were talking about a 45-day, which is not, that's elsewhere in the resolution, but we're not discussing that right now, unless it relates to the change to 90 days.
Okay, the change. I would like to keep it at 180 days and not make the change. At any rate, the people that own these houses are builders, and I think it's important for Greenwich to support the wishes of the residents, and I think there are many who are in favor of this or would be against going back to 120 days. The wishes of the residents more than those of the builders. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend item 25. Mr. Hull.
First of all, the legislation from Hartford is enabling legislation. And the legislative history shows that in the research they've done that they need this time for this whole area because 90 days won't do it. I know even with the Historic District Commission that we're charged to look at these things, it takes a long period of time to do it. And don't forget, we're all volunteers. We're doing that for the love of this town, not to hurt anybody, and to improve the value of the remaining properties. So that's sort of our job in that respect. 180 days is in the enabling legislation. It's a matter of needing the time. We need the time. Nobody's going to try to hurt anybody. We're trying to preserve the value of this town. The way the houses are being torn at a fast rate mostly by builders and developers who don't give a tinker's damn about the rest of the town. They want their profit in that spot, and they're gone. Those of us who lived here all these years would be left with the dregs if we keep this up. They found again in the legislative history that this was a necessary period of time. Number two, so it was started in Norwalk. Norwalk was already introduced it, and there are several other towns in Fairfield County, and it was addressed to keep the historic significance of the houses in Fairfield County, to preserve them as long as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Tessie, our first selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. I thought it was important to advise you as to why the Board of Selectmen voted in favor of this proposed ordinance. When presented on January 24th by Mrs. Richardson and Mr. Hull, there were several questions asked about the application of the ordinance, but most notably of concern to us was that we support it and provide additional opportunity to the Historic District Commission to notify and give the homeowners input as to the potential value of their home that they may not be aware of, in terms of knowing the historical characteristics, providing them information that may not be available to them as a purchaser or new purchaser of the home. So I think our support was based on wanting to see additional time, which provides opportunity for education, and also to respond to the overwhelming sentiments expressed throughout the community about the changing landscape, the physical landscape of the community, and the number of teardowns. And while I recognize that there are provisions contained within this proposed ordinance that are not to the liking of everyone and certainly require maybe further discussion, I think it's important for you to know that I believe our vote and our decision is very responsive to the overall concerns of the community, which we've heard about for so many years. And the very fact that we're having a discussion here tonight on it is a very good thing. Oftentimes we wring our hands and discuss, what we don't like that's happening in the town. We don't like the closing of a long-standing retailer, or we don't like this neighborhood was clear-cut. I think the very fact that you're all looking at this and we're talking about it tonight is very important, and hopefully we can come to some agreeable solution in adopting a measure that really does give impetus for preserving the very finer things in Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Conway? Mr. Conway, please step forward.
A few of us just had a fast question. The 45 days, is that part of the 90? Is that part of the 120 or what? Or 180 rather? Is it in there or is it not?
Mr. Wells, can you answer that? I'm sorry. The question was, where does this 45-day provision relate to the 90 or 180-day waiting period?
Well, the 45-day provision, according to Amina Ahmad from the Law Department, is something that is merely a modification of our own town ordinance, which we can do by home rule.
I assume the question is, when does the 90 or 180-day period begin to run?
Sorry, I missed what he was driving at. The 180 days will not start to, if it's passed as it is now, or for that matter, the 90 days, does not start to run until the objection is filed. So the overall effective time period could be is if, for example, the Historic District Commission filed on the 45th day, then there would be that month and a half and then 6 more months before the homeowner or the builder could start to build.
Okay. Mr. Conway, that answers your question? All right, thank you. All right, we will need a record vote on this motion to amend. Understand we are not voting on the merits of item 25. We are merely deciding now whether to change the language in the proposed ordinance back to what it is currently, to strike the 180-day proposal and replace it with the 90-day proposal. So will the district chairs please mark your voting cards. Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend item 25. If you are in favor of replacing the 180 with the 90, you should vote yes. If you want to leave it as proposed in the call at 180 days, you should vote no. Please proceed to poll your delegation. We will need to await the result of that vote before taking a final vote on item 25. I do have the result of the vote on item 16, which was the appointment of Kimberly Terra-Noir to be a member of the Board of Social Services. Those in favor, 113, opposed 54, abstaining 17. That item has carried. The vote on item 23, which was the appropriation of $83,000 for automotive equipment. Those in favor, 166, opposed 16, abstaining 0. That item has carried. All right. We can, while we're voting on the legislative and rules motion to amend, we can continue discussing if anyone would like to address comments generally to this item. We will continue with that discussion. Anyone interested in speaking on item 25? All right. This might be an appropriate time to stand up, stretch. We'll get the vote on this and continue. We have just one additional item after item 25. All right. Would everyone please take their seat so we can resume? I have the result of the vote on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to amend item 25 by reinstating the 90-day waiting period. Those in favor, 96, opposed, 81, abstaining, 5. That motion to amend has carried. Continuing with discussion on item 25, Nick Edwards, District 8.
In District 8, we had talked about the number of 60 years. And when this was originally introduced, it seemed that the goal was to protect the houses in the 1930s. What I'm concerned about, and it was raised in our district, was as the years go on, what you call historic slides up. So eventually Havemeyer Park is now at least historic under this definition. So I'd like to propose and see if my colleagues think the idea has merit or not. But I propose an amendment on section 6313, last line, 500 square feet or larger that is built before 1940. That protects the houses in the 1930s and before.
And you are moving to amend to insert that language?
Yes.
Is there a second? Second. All right, it has now been moved and seconded to amend section 6-313, waiting period imposed, in the last line, to delete the words more than 60 years old and insert in their place built before 1940. Discussion on that motion to amend. Any discussion on that motion to amend? All right, once again, I will now ask our district chairs to please expedite the vote. We need a recorded vote. I'm sorry. Mary Ferry, before I have not called for the vote yet. Mary Ferry, District 5.
Under state statutes, is that legal? I like the amendment. I just want to know if it's legal.
All right. We will get an answer from our law department. Amina Ahmad, Assistant Town Attorney.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. Under the state statute, there is no limitation in terms of number of years, so there's no 50 years or 60 years or 1940. The enabling legislation simply says that the municipality may adopt a waiting period of not more than 180 days, but it does not talk in terms of the time frame as to how old the structure should be.
So this is in legal order, this proposed amendment. Thank you. All right, any further discussion? Janet Lockton, District 7. Speaking on Mr. Edwards' motion to insert the language built before 1940 in place of more than 60 years old.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have a question. When we just look at this casually now, people, if their home is not over 60 years old or 50 years old and they're going to demolish it, say the house is, 20 years old, they still have to put a demolition sign out front of the house for a number of days and notify the neighbors. That is my belief. But By putting a time period on this, do we then absolve those people with houses that are younger than this, the ability that they have to notify their neighbors and have the demolition sign on the street? Thank you.
Further discussion on Mr. Edwards' motion to amend?
The question is, does this in any way change existing town regulations or ordinance that a home that is 10 years old and is going to be demolished have to post
Mr.
the
Fox,
sign?
could you just, are you able, or someone able to explain what the current procedure is for any homeowner who wants to demolish a structure, including those whose homes or structures are not more than 60 years old?
Mr. Moderator, I don't believe that proposal would alter any current procedures.
But what is do we know what the current procedure is? If I have a 10-year-old home and I want to demolish it, what must I do, if anything? Do we know?
I believe you would file a permit, an application with the building department, and I can just double check again.
Do I need to put a sign up on the front lawn?
I believe so, but let me just check.
Excuse me. We're waiting for an answer.
If you look at section 6-315 of our current ordinance, it does talk about any application for a demolition permit, and then goes on to say that you file a form with the building department, supply certain information in that form, and then then you look at section 6-316, which talks about, again, I'm sorry, that section talks about structures that are 500 square feet or larger and over 60 years old. I'm afraid I don't know the answer, Mr. Moderator, as to exactly what the procedure is if a home is, say, 10 years old or 15 years old, as opposed to the legislation which talks about 60 years old. But
All right. Do I understand you to say that if we were to adopt the proposed amendment, which would govern only those structures, among other things, that were built before 1940, that would not invalidate any other provisions that would apply, that currently apply to homes that are not subject to this waiting period?
right, and as I look at Public Act 07-26, which is really section 29-406 of the Connecticut General Statutes, that is the state demolition code. And the state demolition code talks in terms of any building structure that is being demolished and the process that needs to be followed. And basically the procedure is set forth in 29-406, irrespective of whether a building is 10 years old or 40 years old or 50 or 60 years old. And in 29-406, the town building official really administers the state demolition code, and you go through a procedure in terms of filing an application, filing a certificate of notice, the name of the applicant, etc. So that would not change in any way by the ordinance that's before this board, this RTM, this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion on Mr. Edwards' motion to amend. Mr. Bergweger, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, my understanding is Mr. Edwards has a move to amend Section 6313 but I noticed that in section 6316, there is also a reference to the 60 years. So I would move to amend Mr. Edwards' motion to make the same change in both sections.
All right. We typically, although such a motion to amend is considered a secondary amendment under Robert's rules and is allowed under Robert's rules, our practice has been not to take up secondary motions to amend because of the great possibility of confusion as to what we're voting on. But Mr. Edwards, well, let me ask, is there any objection to the amendment of Mr. Edwards' motion to amend so that it also includes the reference in section 316, which is in the first paragraph, line 3 in our call on page 10. And there it would also say that is built before 1940. Is there any objection to that being incorporated into the pending amendment? Hearing none, that change has been adopted upon unanimous consent. So we are now considering amending item 25 in two places. It is the same language change, striking more than 60 years old and replacing built before 1940. Further discussion on that proposed amendment. Mr. Meskers, District 6. And the owner of a home built before?
1925, actually. I guess the questions I'd bring to the RTM on the measure is the attempt apparently to begin with is to preserve or restore or preserve historic homes without a deadline or a date. And I'm concerned here how we end up with enforcement. Are we going to carbon date the basement or the walk to the house or what portion of the house has been partially restored? I think if we charged a historic group to look at preservation and what constitutes history, whether it is the last remaining cape in Havemeyer in another 20 years, or it's, one of the Bush's residences, I think that should be left to the Historic District. I think modifying here will only confuse the issue, personally.
Further discussion on the pending motion. Janet Lockton.
Thank you.
District 7.
It seems, thank you, Mr. Moderator. When you look at what the general statutes enable us to do, the general statutes enable a municipality to change the waiting periods for when you could, publishing your demolition sign. What this amendment does is it changes the number of years that a house is eligible. But that's not what the statute enabled the town to do. We could change the waiting period, or we could, for publication and demolition. So I think that what we're doing is not what the state allowed us to do. So I think, we better really look at this carefully.
Okay, thank you. We rely on advice from our law department, who has informed us this is in legal order. Is that correct? Yes. All right, further discussion on Mr. Edwards' motion to amend. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Edwards' motion to amend item 25 and proceed to poll your delegation. Have the results of the vote on Mr. Edwards' motion to amend item 25 by revising the language, taking out more than 60 years old and inserting built before 1940. Those in favor, 103. Opposed, 65. Abstaining, 11. That motion to amend has carried. All right. Are there any further speakers interested in addressing item 25 as amended? Is that Mr. Ladonia back there? Todd Ladonia, District 8.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, First Selectman Tessie, Selectman Lavery, and Crumbine, distinguished guests, and fellow members. This resolution does nothing to accomplish its goal. It is only another egregious attack on personal property rights. I am sure my grandfathers, plural, never could have imagined when they arrived here from Italy that they would construct historically significant structures. This will ultimately force, excuse me, ultimately force homeowners to get demolition permits before attempting to sell their homes. As a realtor, that's me, I would have the fiduciary responsibility to
Mr. Ladonia, you understand what's now before us. The only change that's been made is what we just made with Mr. Edwards.
I understand.
And the 45-day.
And the 45 days.
Okay. So
against the 45 days also.
Okay.
As a realtor, I would have the fiduciary responsibility to advise any listing client of a home that they should consider getting a permit, a demo permit, before listing, as they would lose a certain percentage of potential buyers looking at their property that want to put a new home there, maybe the home of their dreams. I believe this will force more tear-downs, because permits will be in hand. Let us defeat this change, defeat the motion, and please join me and vote no.
Louisa Stone, District 10.
Well, I found that a very interesting point, because if the resolution is defeated, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll be right back where we are today.
Yes.
Which might not be a bad thing. You know, it really seems ironic that we have a Board of Selectmen that's taken the initiative to try to support our Historic District Commission, who are unpaid volunteers with no staff, who are doing the best they can to protect historic properties in town, that we have first, as a body, voted not to avail ourselves of the state enabling legislation that would give them a longer window in which to consider, and now have taken a second motion that would reduce the number of properties that could be considered by putting it back to 1940. They say you get unintended consequences. It sounds as if putting this on the agenda at all, if it's approved, will actually set us back from where we have been till now. So I would vote against the whole thing.
All right, Jeb Beckwith, District 8.
Thanks. It's late, so I'll be quick. We've heard from realtors here. I would say that this is a great idea, but I think the execution is poor. What we're doing here is we're making older houses less attractive because it's extra hurdles to get to. I do believe that there's that if you're any homeowner, and you're looking to sell your house, you're going to be incented to get the demolition code done before you put the house on the market, so that you get that up and running, make your house more valuable. Builders, contractors buy their houses from homeowners, and ultimately we're talking about the homeowner's value. I think that we've all seen, we drive by these neighborhoods and we've seen demolitions going on. If the town, and I think it's a worthy goal, if the town wants to preserve the older houses, then we need to do it by raising the value of these houses, not lowering them. You can do that through tax rebates, tax incentives. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but you need to raise the value of these houses, not lower the value of the houses that you want to maintain.
Gordon Ennis, District 8, speaking on item 25 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, just be a few minutes. I just want to summarize some of the arguments that we've heard tonight. I think My view on this is we really ought to send it back to the kitchen. It's really not ready, and we need to get it ready. There's a couple of items I want to talk about. First of all, the 60-year cutoff or the 81-year cutoff. It's okay to want to preserve the look and feel of a 61 or an 81-year-old neighborhood to suit some nostalgic view of how the town should look. But if we're going to do that, then we ought to do it with money other than the homeowner's money or public money. In other words, I'll show you a solution in a second, but we should use private funds or some other capital source to make that happen. Simply being old is not an intrinsic value characteristic that deserves to be preserved. Being ancient does, but we don't have anything here that qualifies for that. I'm 61. What does that mean in terms of this ordinance? So let's not confuse the two, okay? 60 years or 81 years is merely our past. It's not our heritage. I think also with respect to architecture in town, if there are significant architectural entities in the community, they're going to survive. And they're going to survive if they continue to function in their original and intended use or their evolving and adapted use. Older structures don't disappear because they're hunted to extinction for sport or mischief. They disappear because they're replaced by something that better serves the constitutionally protected needs of its owners. So let's not restrict the rights of private property owners any more than we have to, and let's certainly not do it for the convenience of historical commissions or societies or other minority groups, with all due respect to their mission, which I wholeheartedly support. I think that their passion for preservation is something we should encourage, but this item doesn't lead us down that path. I love history as much as anyone, but I think we should be more focused on making history than reliving it. Some of these structures really ought to go away. The fair and truly constitutional way to handle this, in my judgment, is to incent owners to keep the houses that everybody seems to think are so valuable. If we can't do that, then we should employ a tax-favored vehicle to raise private capital, and for the purpose of acquiring historically significant properties, then coordinate with interested organizations and individuals to identify those properties and develop a plan for their use, then negotiate with the owners to either buy the property now or buy an option that gives us the right to buy it in the future when they decide to sell it. And finally, let's acquire the property and then put an endowment in place so the property will take care of itself. With respect to McMansions, I just want to mention one thing. There is a so-called McMansion blight, and a lot of people in town have talked about it, and they don't like it. But remember this, those that can afford big houses can also afford big property taxes. Activities that are lawful but unwanted are often chased away by an unpleasant tax environment. For example, if taxes are raised high enough, McMansions won't want to live here. And if they're raised even higher than that, none of us will want to live here. So somewhere between, there's a solution that might be a little bit more positive. Where land is expensive, it tends to be used in a way that provides the best return on the capital invested to buy and maintain it. And owners who buy and tear down are really making their American dream come true. We got to remember that. That's what's going on. They worked hard for their money. They're paying the full cost to develop the property they lawfully own. And what's wrong with that? Many residents in our town are looking forward to retirement, partly funded by the equity appreciated in their family home. We should let them sell it the best way they can. If they sell it to a developer who tears it down and builds something else, that's what they're entitled to do. After all, they paid for it, they maintained it, they paid the taxes on it. They should be allowed to use it in the best way they can. I think we ought to send this item back and get it fixed. So please vote no. Thank you.
Rosa Feeney, District 11. If it's going to be of any length, I'll need you to come forward. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, my question is this. It seems to me that the issue at hand is, one of them, probably the biggest one, is preserving the streetscape and the natural beauty that is inherent in Greenwich. Greenwich is one of many municipalities across the United States that has historic value, and I think it would be interesting to find out what other towns, such as Southampton and Amagansett, what they have done to find that fine line and that combination of development balanced with historic beauty. And I think that I was wondering if that has been looked at, and if it hasn't been, could it be looked at?
Well, does anyone know? I suppose the answer to your second question, could it be done? Sure. The question then is, will it be done before or after we act on this tonight?
If it goes back...
now, you could move... Now, we have just heard a proposal to send this back by voting no. You could refer it back to some particular place. So those are our options. Correct. That's correct. And with it, your amendment dies. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards says, so be it. Ms. Feeney, did you have anything further to add?
I would like to try to work with what we have so that it doesn't die and move forward with it, because I think there's potential here that needs to be refined.
Well,
but I would ask your opinion, where would it go?
I didn't mean to confuse the issue.
Okay.
If we vote no, we still have a demolition waiting period ordinance on our books. So it doesn't die in the sense that there's nothing there. What was brought to us tonight would just simply be defeated, and we could await some additional effort to bring it back.
So I could bring it back to my District 11. We could,
Yes.
play with it and bring it back.
Correct.
At some point. Okay. Tom?
All right, further discussion on item 25 as amended. Arlene Lamazzo, District 6. It is. Yes. No. If as long as you don't want to say anything other than you move to postpone until. All right. Now let me just hold off one moment. You understand the difference between a motion to postpone and a motion to refer. If we postpone, it comes back to us as it is tonight. As we have amended it. I mean, it is currently amended. If you want to postpone, you'd be postponing in its current form to the meeting that it comes back to us. And our next meeting has a call deadline of very short. Is it this week? The 21st of March. So all right, it's very short. Today is the 10th. So that's one option. Referring it would put it in someone's lap, and they would then have discretion as to what they do and when they bring it back. And the other option, of course, is to vote on it tonight. Well, not an RTM group. We have to refer it within the RTM. Pardon me? All right, it has been moved and seconded to refer item 25 to our Land Use Committee. Discussion on that motion to refer. All right, Mr. Well, We're not going to, it didn't come to you, so.
Yeah, I'd be very opposed to it if it were coming to me. No, I think you should not postpone this item. We have discussed it. This horse has been beaten near to death. Let's vote it up or down. If the Historic District Commission wants to bring it back in some form, they want to make further changes, let them do that. But vote it up or down. Let us know how you feel about this provision now and go from there.
Okay. All right, let's not repeat arguments. We'll get the other side from Mr. Bloomer, and then we're ready to go.
If it were referred to the Land Use Committee, I'm really not sure what we would do with it. In the sense that we have no particular insight beyond what we all have into the best way to deal with this issue. The body that really ought to take another look at it is the Historic District Commission, if it is defeated this evening. And the way to deal with that is the way that Mr. Wells suggested we deal with it, which is to vote it up or down now. So I would oppose the motion to refer it to the Land Use Committee, not because I don't want the work, but because I just don't see what we can contribute to the resolution of this.
Thank you. Mr. Porter, District 5.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just briefly, I think this has become a very useful discussion tonight for one very simple reason, and that is that when we speak about demolition, there's an awareness on the part of our constituents that's really non-existent. If you look at the block between Lockwood Avenue, Arcadia, Highview, and Park, in the last 10 years, there's been a 30%.
Mr. Porter.
There's been a 30%.
Are we going to refer this or not?
I'm going to make my point, Mr. Moderator.
Well,
there's been a 30.
Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter. Should we refer this to land use or not?
No, we should not refer it to land use. The organization that needs to respond to the issues that we've raised tonight is the Planning and Zoning Commission. And they're the ones, along with DPW and its overall responsibility, that have responsibility for demolition permits, for highway use, et cetera, et cetera. What we've done tonight is to open up an issue that relates to all of land use, the values of properties, and what the impact is on neighborhoods or individual landowners. And in that context, I agree that it should be referred. I also agree that we shouldn't deal with it tonight, and it should be fully investigated. The truth is, Mr. Moderator, I don't know how, except for one of our own organizational groups, we can refer it to anybody. So if land use won't deal with it, then I don't know where it goes. But the people that need to be looking at this issue is planning and zoning.
All right. I'm going to call for a voice vote on Ms. Lamazzo's motion to refer item 25 to our Land Use Committee. If you are in favor of that, obviously you vote yes. If you are opposed and want to vote on this tonight, you should vote no. All those in favor of referring item 25 to our Land Use Committee, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. All right, that motion has failed. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item 25 as amended, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item 33, the last of our agenda items, comes before us. Peter Minarski, our town controller.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, RTM members.
All right, excuse me. I ask that the voting be conducted quietly and that attention be paid to all speakers. Mr. Minarski.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Be it resolved by the representative town meeting of the town of Greenwich with respect to the authorization, issuance, and sale of not exceeding $22 million of town of Greenwich general obligation refunding bonds, that the comptroller is authorized to refund the $24,830,000 general obligation bonds dated January 1st, 2003, the refunded bonds, and so described as it appears in the calls. This resolution shall be effective until December 31st, 2008.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 33 has been moved and seconded. Pam Frederick with the report of our Finance Committee.
Okay, it's our last item. Good evening. This item was presented by Pete Minarski, our town comptroller, and the town's advisor, Bill Lindsay, from Independent Bond Investment Consultants. The town has an existing general obligation bond that was issued in 2003 to fund sewer construction. Because interest rates have declined since then, the comptroller is seeking authorization to issue a new bond that will refund the existing bond at a lower interest rate. When this refunding bond was initiated, savings of up to $670,000 net of all issuance costs, and those costs were $172,000. That savings was anticipated. Reducing the average reducing the average existing coupon rate from 4.25% to 3.94%. However, this has been negatively impacted by market volatility in the muni market. As many of you are aware, this was precipitated by a disruption in the credit and auction rate securities markets. Providing authorization gives the comptroller the flexibility to take advantage of lower rates when and if this occurs. These savings would go toward reducing the Millbrook and North Mianus homeowners or property owner sewer assessments. These savings were estimated to be a potential $2,000 savings per assessment over the remaining 16 years. These bonds will be issued for no more than $20 million, so long as the savings are at least 2%. And this authority expires December 31st, 08. There's more voting going up there. It was suggested that we amend the item to require minimum savings in the resolution, but it was noted that the state statute already requires a positive net present value savings, in addition to the fact that the BET approval is needed. It was also noted that the bond principal and insurance cash flows would have been helpful to ensure that the savings were equalized over the term. This was confirmed by the consultant to be the case for these bonds. Overall, this is a benefit. It provides flexibility to the comptroller to provide a benefit to the property owners in the sewer districts. Our Finance Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Discussion on item 33. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item 33. Proceed to poll your delegation. That being the last item to come before us tonight, we will await the results of the two pending votes before adjourning the meeting. I have the result of the vote on item 25, which is the ordinance regarding waiting periods for demolition permits. Those in favor, 89. Opposed, 80. Abstaining, 2. That item has carried as amended. I have the result of the vote on item 33, our final item, regarding authorization regarding outstanding bonds. And this item requires an affirmative vote of a majority of the entire membership of the RTM, which means it requires 116 affirmative votes. Those in favor, 143. Opposed, 12. Abstaining, 3. Item 33 has carried. There being no further business to come before the meeting and absent objection, the meeting is adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home.